The topic I want to discuss today is building successful open source projects on scale. I know the initial topic is much longer. I try to shorten it. And why I'm actually talking about this. So we created a pretty successful open source product called Vue Storefront. And I thought, it would be great to share what we have learned, because maybe some of you also want to make an open source product. Maybe some of you also want to make a business out of this. And to be honest, this is super hard. And we had probably more luck than knowledge, especially at the beginning. I want to share with you what worked for us and also some tips that I learned throughout the way. And before I will talk further, let's set the expectations properly. So this topic is huge, really. I could probably make a 2-day workshop and there'll still be a lot of things to cover. So I tried to pick the things that I personally would like to learn about sooner when I was starting this project, and ones that really influence our success. So when speaking about success, we actually have to define what successful open source project is, because I'm pretty sure that each of you has a different definition in your head. So for the purpose of this talk, let's define 4 characteristics of successful open source project. First of all, it has to be profitable, at least to the degree that will allow you to work on it full time. Of course, if you can't even make money for your own living, it's hard to call it successful, at least from the business perspective. And I will be talking mostly about the business perspective in here. Also, it has to have active and vibrant community around it. It's open source, right? Like, what's open source without community? Also, it has to succeed in its category to be considered successful. And if it's one of the top of mind choices to solve problem you are solving, let's say building e-commerce front ends, then you're there. And last but not least, it would be great if you would be able to scale this project to a good business. Okay, so now we know what successful means in that case. Now, let's look how it looked in our case. So let's look how it looked in case of Vue Storefront. If you don't know Vue Storefront, we are an open source project that turned to be a great company. And we are building a framework for building e-commerce storefronts. So no matter what backend technology you're using, Magento, SAP, Salesforce, probably right now you want to migrate to headless because it's being a new trend and it's much better than old monolithic commerce. But the issue is it's super hard to do this, really, especially if you're a small or medium shop. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it more approachable. We're trying to make it much easier to migrate to headless commerce. And you can basically set up a new store in minutes using Vue Storefront. So how it all started? It started in 2019 as R&D project in e-commerce agency called Divante. And it was basically just my boss and myself working after hours without any prior knowledge about open source. Now we are a market leader in e-commerce space, especially, to be more precise, in the space of headless commerce frontends. We have more than 1,000 live stores. We hit this milestone in December last year. We have more than $19 million of funding, and we're also invited to very exclusive accelerator Y Combinator. And our team has grown from 6 people at the beginning of last year to 80 people at the beginning of this year. So in this talk, I will share some key takeaways that, in my opinion, influence our success, and I will add a bit of theory into that. So what exactly happened between this 2019 and 2022? Let's see step by step. First, and probably most important decision we had to make actually was what exactly we want to build. And usually you don't even ask this question because it's coming naturally because of some need, and how it was in our case. So we started with Storefront actually to solve our own problems. And personally, I think it was one of the main reasons actually why we have succeeded. Because one of the biggest challenges of building any customer-facing product is finding so-called product market fit. In simple words, it's just trying and pivoting and trying again and pivoting until your product is solving the needs of real customers on the market and until they are willing to pay for that. And if you are a domain expert and you have a very strong expertise in your domain, you probably already know if it is solving those problems or not. Moreover, in our case, we were also our first customers, and we are our perfect customer persona. So if we liked what we were building, and if we would use that, then probably others will also do this. Vue Storefront was built for e-commerce agencies, and we were e-commerce agency. So once we made this most important decision, we had to make another, and really it was equally important. Well, what is decision-making madness, right? So we had to choose our tools. And choosing your tech stack is almost as important as choosing what you want to build. So if you choose the right technologies that are growing right now, you will probably grow together with them. And if you choose the technologies that no one is using, you can guess by yourself. So in our case, we chose Vue.js because it's awesome, right? But also because it was growing like crazy back then. In 2019, it was slightly after the release of Vue.js 2. We also choose Magento, which is an e-commerce platform, which is very well known from their open source community. So we are also one of the first on the market, but over time we identified another value of going with Vue.js instead of React. So almost all of our competitors decided to use React. So we are actually the only choice for the companies that use Vue, and all our React competitors, they had to fight with each other. So the Vue space was smaller, but it was all ours, which allowed us to grow much bigger than any React competitor. And I think this is a pretty important takeaway, that you have to choose the technology that is growing, but also choosing the most mainstream technology is not always the right choice. The third decision was also pretty natural to us, but it doesn't have to be the same in your case. So let's take a look at different environments we can build our products in. Vue Storefront was bootstrapped inside an e-commerce agency from Wrocław in Poland called Divante, and honestly, I really doubt we would be where we are if we would do it differently. Because we were our own ideal customer, so it was super easy to validate the idea. And the agency, it helped us a lot to find first customers. It helped us a lot to grow because we're able to utilize the resources, and we didn't have to worry about money at all. So building or incubating your company inside agency is probably the best you can do if you want to make a business out of your product. Because you can use the agency's marketing, you can use agency's sales resources to promote and sell your product to the first customers. And the agency is also kind of like your first investor, but also first customer at the same time. And you will also, most likely, because it's not true for everyone, be able to work on the project during your working hours. And it will definitely accelerate the project. And let's be honest, it will be good for your mental health. And it could sound amazing because it is amazing, but it comes with a cost. And this cost is basically that the project will be most likely a property of an agency. And you won't have any real ownership, and you won't have any real decision-making power here. So it's best to agree on some terms with your employer before you're starting the project, if you want to go with this model. Otherwise, they could literally do anything with it. There is also an alternative. You can basically bootstrap the project at home and then talk to your company. I will talk about that in a moment. There's also a harder way that will also put much less pressure on you. Why I'm saying it's harder? Well, it's harder because you have to commit your own time, your own free time into this. So if you're not sure if you want to fully commit to your business yet, well, starting after hours could be the best idea. Because no one is watching your back, no one is asking you to deliver anything. And you can always say, okay, it was not worth it, or okay, I don't like it anymore, and just, put your pet project to the folder with dozens of other pet projects, and that's it. You can always start like this, then talk to the agency later. And having something ready, it will put you in a much, much better position for negotiations. And if you go with this model, you will basically have to sacrifice a lot of free time. You can also choose to be fully committed to your project, but without any external help, and work on this project full time and basically, spending your own money savings during that time. And it's super risky. It requires you to spend savings or raise money. So I wouldn't personally recommend that, especially at the beginning. Even if you trust your project a lot, like don't quit your job, please. And if you choose this way, you can always choose not going with an agency, but seeking for some external funding. And depending on your plans, you can run, casual GitHub sponsorships, or find an investor, or even get some subsidies from the government. Basically, what I would suggest at the beginning is getting some subsidies, because it's pretty easy to get. You can also choose crowdfunding, finding a VC. Well, once you start the startup, you have to fully commit into that. And if you're not sure you want to do this, just wait until you are. Another thing that, in my opinion, had a huge impact on the success of our product is timing. And you have to release in the right moment with the right things. So when is the right moment and what are the right things, right? So in our case, it was actually too early. We released too early, and we succeeded mostly because there was no other option to choose from anyway. We started promoting the project after just few initial commits, and we are really lacking proper documentation, contribution guide, everything, because we had no idea how to run open source projects. And back then, it was much less popular in companies, really. We even got invited by SAP to Montreal to actually help them with their open source project. So this is showing how hard it was for the companies to do things like that. And because we haven't got those rules, because I told you that it's not worth doing this, but why? So we spent really insane amounts of time on correcting pull requests, answering basic questions. And we could just have put that on the documentation. We could have put some contribution rules, and that work would be more or less automated. So maturity of the product itself is not everything. So try to have at least a working POC of your solution. And, to me, this is the best moment to launch. But if you still have some major architectural decisions to make, it's probably better not to launch right now, because if you remove a lot of code or make the work of people who contributed obsolete because you made some significant changes, they could get very easily discouraged. And once you have this POC with the architecture that that won't change rather drastically, then it's the right moment to build all the things around it. So have a good documentation, to create a README, to create a contribution guide, to create a code of conduct. Also, very important decision is to use a license. And really, a lot of people will refuse to contribute to your project or use your project because there is no license, or because they don't like the license. So for the open source project, I think the best option is MIT. And MIT is saying, basically, do whatever you want with this, it's all right. But if you want to be a little bit more strict, for example, if you want to limit the usages of your software to open source usages, so if they will pick your repository, they can't close it. If they fork your repository, they can't close it and make a profitable business out of this. They have to also make it open source. And in addition to that, set up some communication channel like Slack or Discord, where you can basically ask other questions. Now, pushing the product to the world is really not everything, because if you want to be successful in open source space, you have to build a community around this, right? And in reality, your community could be a huge growth buster if you build a good relation with them. So from my experience, if you have a good relation with your community, they will be your friends. They will push your product in their jobs. They will support you on social media, on events, and everywhere. So this is an army of marketers that you're not paying for, that are very happy for promoting your product. How cool is that? But how to build this active and supportive community? So first of all, the community needs a place to live and communicate with you and each other. And I strongly suggest having at least a real-time chat and some sort of crawlable forum to ask questions. In Vue Storefront, we started with Slack, but its limitations made it useless. So we had limit of 10,000 messages and everything else was disappearing. So once we reached around 4,000 people, you can imagine that we had history only of the messages from the same day. So to me, it's useless for bigger communities. And last year we switched to Discord, and it was definitely a good decision. It's much better. So for the chat, I would advise Discord. And for the forum, really, you don't have to set up anything specific. You can just use the GitHub discussions feature and just focus on the project. We had forum back then, and we decided to migrate to GitHub discussions to increase the traffic on our repositories. But it's still an ongoing process, so I can't really tell if it was worth it or not. I can write later somewhere. Yeah, one of the biggest struggles when you are starting a new open source project is actually finding the first contributors. And really, it's not easy. So when someone will decide to contribute to your project, we really treat each of them as your most precious gem. This is exactly what we have done. So talk with them daily, make sure they're still motivated to help and that they feel fulfilled. And over time, they will also attract others. And for the past 2 years, we were in a very, very close contact with most of our contributors, and it helped us to create a very, very active community. Also, people will actually not contribute to your project just because it's cool. And it's very important to acknowledge because I see a lot of people who are basically pushing code to the wild and hoping people will start, writing code for them. Your community is not your free labor. They are your partners. So they need to see value in being part of your community. You are seeing this value. Yes, they are promoting what you're building. They are pushing it in their jobs. It's called bottom-up approach. But they also need to have something that you are offering them. And it has to be something valuable, because otherwise, why wouldn't they just watch Netflix in their free time, right? And some of the things that our community members are getting from participating in Vue Storefront community are recognition. Social status is super important for a lot of people. And in many cases, it is enough. Influence on the roadmap. So when you're a user of the product, when you're participating in the community, then you have influence on actually how it will look like. And apart from this, they could get knowledge that will put them ahead of others. And there's a lot of other values that you can bring to your community, depending on what type of product you have. Also, they will most likely have a lot of other things fighting for their attention. So you have to know who is in your community and make sure that they have something exciting to do every few days, so they can make participating in the community a habit or contributing a habit. And honestly, we haven't done that at the beginning. We were just spontaneously talking with people. We're always on Slack. But when we created a company, when we bootstrap a business, and when we had to focus on that, where we lost a lot of contributors, because suddenly they had nothing to do. They were contributing spontaneously, but we're not having time for them. So they got discouraged and they found something else. Maybe they're watching Netflix right now. So another thing is that you have to really measure how your community is going, because they will be interacting with you from really many different channels. And it's really hard to quantify that. I mean, it's really hard to actually know if your community is going well or not. And I strongly suggest, once your community will grow, to use some kind of software dashboard, which is actually collecting the data from different sources and showing you how well your community is doing. You can also have a CRM for your community members and really see how long they haven't been contributing, ping them from time to time, make sure that they are fully engaged all the time. It could be even an Excel spreadsheet. And for the measurements and analytics, we are using Ahoy Connect in Vue Storefront. It's great, really. We are using it for a month, and I can't believe we were not using it before. But also a very common tool is Orbit. And I think Orbit is being used by Algolia and many others. Another thing that you will definitely have to do, but on the later stages, once you will decide, okay, I'm going to make it a business, I'm going to earn on this, I'm going to probably make a commercial product. So I guarantee you the first thing that you will sacrifice is the community, because once you will have paying customers, they will have a lot of requests and you'll have to focus on them. And it also happened to us. So we also lost part of the community because we focus on the business first, and there were so many requests from the clients that we had to just deal with them first. And turned out it was no time left for the community. So what we did later to actually prevent that, we separated the community team from the enterprise team. And in the community team, we have separate engineers working on the community tooling. We have separate marketing team. We have developer relations engineers, and they are working fully and only on the community. And the enterprise team, they are working on delivering product, talking with clients, fulfilling clients' needs. This way, you have a nice diversification. And well, this is one of the hardest things. This is why I'm leaving it for the end. So how to make open source business profitable? And first and probably most important rule here is don't compete with your community. Monetizing open source is super hard because you can very easily find yourself in a position when you're actually competing with your community. If you do it right, your community can be a huge growth engine. And your community will actually open a lot of ways to monetize and grow faster, but it will also close some of them as well. To give you an example, our business model is started with licensing software. So we launched a new version of Vue Storefront, Vue Storefront 2, and we were building integration for it. And natural choice was, okay, so now we will sell those integrations under the license. But over time, our community started to build the same integrations, and we started to wonder what to do with that, right? Should we discourage them from building them or pretend they don't exist? Like what we should do? Never do this, really, because you're not only competing with your community, but you're also losing its potential. So you're like losing twice. Instead, try to solve the problems of your community. And really, if you have a big community, if you have a Slack, if you have if you have a forum, you probably know what they are struggling with. In our case, people ask tons of questions about hosting. So, where's the best place to host Vue Storefront, how to configure AWS or GCP to host Vue Storefront. And it was a great sign that they need something like this, that there is a need for this kind of tool that we can monetize on. And this is exactly what we did. But, you don't have to be scoped into like solving problems of your community. You can also be a little bit more creative and, for example, mix different models. So let me give you an example. So part of the mission of Vue Storefront is basically to make headless commerce available for small and medium businesses, because we know that it's a little bit costly to migrate into this, even though it's super beneficial. A lot of small and medium businesses decide to not go with headless because it costs them a lot to migrate. So we want to make it easier. So if they are using e-commerce platform that has either a free or low tier, they are having the integrations for free, it's open source, and it's on MIT license. But for enterprise e-commerce platforms, we are licensing our product, so big companies are paying for it. And this way, they're also contributing to the global adoption of headless commerce because they are sponsoring the integrations that we are giving for free. And a lot of projects has actually its open source and enterprise version, which includes either different features or support, SLAs, and a bunch of other things. And you can also make profit by serving a paid support, for example, just like Nux does. But it's always best to build a recurring revenue. Okay. It was 10 minutes longer, so that's all I wanted to share. I hope I chose the right things to share and that you learned something useful from my talk. And sorry for the initial difficulties. And I hope really you enjoyed this talk. And I really hope you enjoyed the whole conference. And well, thanks for having me.